Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins. The Lost Palantír of Osgiliath. Section 1. Shadowed Beginnings. In the waning days of the third age of stars, when the light of the celestial towers grew dim and the ancient covenants between the realms of men and the firstborn lay all but forgotten, there came a stirring in the deep places of the world. It was felt first in the roots of the elder wood, where the great oaks had stood sentinel since the world's youth, and in the cold waters of the Mirreleth that flowed like liquid starlight from the mountains of morning. The wind, which had long carried only the songs of growing things and the whispered prayers of the woodland folk, now bore something else upon its breath, a shadow that had no form, a silence that devoured sound, a cold that reached beyond the marrow into the very spirit of living things. In those days, few remembered the name of Valdris the Golden, that great city which had stood proud upon the confluence of 3 rivers, her white towers reaching toward heaven like fingers of prayer. Fewer still recalled the Palantír Valdanor, the great seeing stone that had been the crown jewel of that city's wisdom, through which the watchers had gazed across vast distances and deep years, holding counsel with far realms and reading the movements of the stars themselves. But in the halls of Silverbrook, where the wise still gathered in council, there was one who remembered. Arathan the Grey, oldest of the Istari who had come from the uttermost west in the world's younger days, sat in the high chamber as the autumn rain drummed against diamond-paned windows. His weathered hands rested upon a staff of white wood, and his deep eyes held the weight of centuries unnumbered. The shadows lengthen. He spoke, his voice like wind through ancient stones. I have walked the borders of the elder wood, and the trees themselves whisper of a darkness that seeps upward from the earth. The birds no longer sing at dawn in the valleys that look toward the ruins of Valdris. Lady Morwen of the Silver House, keeper of the old law and guardian of the Starflame, looked up from the tome that lay open before her. Her face, fair as moonlight upon water, was troubled. The signs have been clear for many months, Arathan. The shepherds speak of wolves that walk upright in the high passes. The fishermen of Lake Mirreleth bring in nets heavy with water, but empty of fish. And last night, she paused, her voice growing soft with wonder and fear. Last night, I saw a star fall from its appointed place in the constellation of the Crown, and where it fell, no light returned. The wizard's grip tightened upon his staff. For 700 years he had watched and waited, keeping vigil over the sleeping shadows of the world. He had hoped never again to feel the cold touch of the ancient fear that now crept through his bones like winter frost. Then it has begun, he said, rising slowly from his chair. The enemy stirs once more in the forgotten places. And if my heart speaks truly, he seeks that which was lost when Valdris fell, the Palantír that could show him all the movements of the free peoples, all their plans and hopes laid bare beneath his gaze. Thunder rolled across the sky like the footsteps of giants, and in that sound, both wise guardians heard an echo of battles yet to come. Section 2. A Whisper in the Trees. The elderwood had stood since the world's first dawn, its roots drinking from springs that remembered the music of creation itself. Here, where time moved differently and the very air shimmered with old magic. The trees held counsel in voices too deep for mortal ears to comprehend. But on this grey morning, as Arathan made his way along the moss-covered paths that wound between the ancient trunks, even he could hear their distress. The great oaks groaned with a sorrow that had no words, and the silver birches wept sap like tears. The very ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with an unease that made his staff hum with responsive power. He had come seeking Thalion Leafwhisper, eldest of the woodland folk, whose kind had dwelt here since before the sun and moon were hung in the heavens. If any could speak of what darkness gathered in the deep places, it would be he. The path led him to a clearing where 7 ancient elms stood in a perfect circle, their branches intertwined overhead like the fingers of hands joined in prayer. At their center grew a fountain of living crystal, its waters singing softly as they fell from tier to tier, each note pure as starlight. But today, the music was discordant, troubled, as if the very springs of the earth had grown fearful. "Greetings, Stormcrow," came a voice, like wind through leaves. From behind the largest elm stepped a figure, tall and graceful, his hair the color of autumn gold, his eyes green as deep forest pools. Thalion wore robes that seemed woven from twilight itself, and in his hand he carried a staff crowned with a single white flower that bloomed eternal. "Greetings, old friend," Arathan replied, though there was little joy in either greeting. "The Lady Morwen has seen a star fall from its place. The shepherds speak of shadows walking upright, and I—" He paused, studying the woodland guardian's troubled face. "I feel a chill that reaches from the buried depths where things that should sleep stir once more." Thalion nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around his staff. 3 nights passed. The trees began to dream of fire and ash. They remember Arathan. They remember the burning of Valdris when the sky rained ember and stone, and the great towers fell like wheat before the scythe. But this is different. This is— He searched for words, his ageless face creased with worry. "This is remembrance, twisted into prophecy." The wizard's heart grew cold. "Tell me." "The roots speak of trembling in the earth, beneath the glass hills, where the ruins lie buried beneath bramble and forgetting. Something walks there that has not walked for an age of the world, and in their dreams the trees see again the great eye of crystal, the seeing stone that was lost when the city burned." Thalion's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but now it calls to its master, and its song grows stronger with each passing day. A wind rose without warning, setting the leaves to whispering frantically overhead. In that sound, both guardians heard something that chilled them to the bone. Not words, but the echo of words. Not a voice, but the memory of one that had once commanded legions of darkness. Section 3. The Lone Rider. The road that wound eastward from Silverbrook had once been a highway of white stone, carved by the master builders of the Second Age, when traffic flowed freely between the great cities and the realm knew peace. Now it was little more than a track overgrown with thornbrake and yellow grass, broken by the roots of trees that had claimed it for their own. Arathan rode alone upon Shadowmane, his grey horse whose sire had drunk from the waters of the blessed realm. The autumn mist clung to the hollows and valleys, and each breath came white in the chill air. His destination lay 3 days hence, the glass hills, where beneath tangled root and creeping vine, the broken stones of Valdris kept their silent watch over secrets better left buried. As the miles passed beneath his horse's hooves, the wizard's mind turned to the words of Thalian Leaf Whisper. The trees remembered fire and ash, but they also remembered something else. The final hours of the great city, when the Palantír Valdanor had blazed with such fierce light that it could be seen from the mountains of morning. In that terrible hour, as the enemy's hosts poured through the broken gates, the Seeing Stone had sung with power so great that the earth itself had cracked beneath its resonance. Then had come the darkness and silence and forgetting, but not true forgetting, never that, for the Palantír was wrought by hands that knew no decay, forged in fires that burned before the world was made. Such things did not simply cease to be. They waited, patient as stone, until the hour of their awakening came. The road dipped into a valley where a stream ran quick and cold over beds of white pebbles. Here Arathan paused to water his horse and rest, though rest came hard to him now. The weight of premonition pressed upon his shoulders like a cloak of lead, and every shadow seemed to hold watching eyes. As Shadowmane drank, the wizard gazed eastward toward the glass hills, which rose like sleeping giants against the pale sky. From this distance, they seemed innocent enough, rolling downs covered with the gold and crimson of autumn leaves, crowned here and there with stands of pine that stood dark against the horizon. But beneath that peaceful facade lay the bones of a city that had once been the envy of all the western lands. A sound made him turn, the jingle of harness and the clip of hooves upon stone. From the north came a rider mounted upon a bay mare, her cloak streaming behind her like a banner. As she drew near, Arathan saw that it was Alara Swiftarrow, one of the rangers who kept watch upon the wild lands. "Well met, Arathan Greycloak," she called, reining in beside the stream. "I bear word from Captain Aldrich, strange tidings from the glass hills. Shepherds speak of lights moving among the ruins at night, and sounds like the ringing of great bells that have no bells to ring them." The wizard's jaw tightened. How long since these signs began? A fortnight, perhaps less, but growing stronger with each passing night. Alara's weathered face was grim. "The captain sends word. He can spare 20 men if you have need of them." Arathan shook his head slowly. 20 would not be enough if my fears prove true. This is work for stealth, not steel. He mounted Shadowmane once more, gathering up the reins. "But tell Aldrich to keep his rangers close. If I do not return within 7 days, bid him seal all the roads that lead eastward and suffer none to pass." Section 4. The Glass Hills in the distance. The Glass Hills earned their name not from any mineral that could be hewn from their slopes, but from the way the light caught upon their faces in the hour before dawn, a gleaming that was like crystal, like ice, like tears frozen in time. They rose from the eastern plains in a series of gentle swells, each crowned with the remnants of what had once been gardens and groves, now wild and overgrown with brake and thorn. As Arathan crested the final ridge of the old road, the hills spread before him in the dying light of afternoon. The sun, pale and distant, cast long shadows across the undulating landscape, and in those shadows he could see them, the broken teeth of walls and towers that thrust up through the earth like the bones of some primeval beast. Valdris had been vast, even in ruins, even buried beneath 5 centuries of wind-blown earth and creeping vine. The scope of it took the breath away. The city had sprawled across 7 hills and down into the valleys between, following the course of the 3 rivers that met here in a confluence of silver and song. Now the rivers ran quieter, their channels choked with silt and fallen stone, but still they flowed, still they remembered. But it was not the scope of the ruins that caused Shadowmane to shy and snort with sudden fear. It was something else, a wrongness that hung in the air like smoke without fire, a tension that made the very stones seem to lean inward with watchful malice. The wizard dismounted and placed a steadying hand upon his horse's neck, murmuring words of comfort in the old tongue. But his own heart was far from easy. The feeling that emanated from the ruins was familiar, though he had not sensed it for many long years. It was the touch of the enemy, not his presence, but his influence, seeping outward from some hidden source like poison from a wound. "So," he whispered to the evening wind, "you have found it at last." From his saddlebags, he drew forth a crystal pendant, clear as mountain water, that hung upon a silver chain. The Elisar, a gift from the Lady Morwen, wrought in the forges of the Silver House, to ward against shadow and reveal hidden things. As he lifted it to catch the last rays of sunlight, it began to glow with a soft blue radiance, and through its crystalline depths, he could see what mortal eyes alone could not perceive. The ruins were not empty. Dark shapes moved among the broken stones, figures that walked upright but bore no resemblance to any living thing. They drifted like smoke given form, clustering thickest around what had once been the heart of the city, where the great palace had stood upon the highest hill. And there, at the very center of that shadow-haunted place, a light pulsed like a beating heart, red as blood, cold as starlight, terrible as judgment. The Palantír of Aldana blazed with unholy fire, and around it the servants of darkness gathered like moths drawn to a flame that would consume rather than warm. Section 5. Into the Black. The descent into the ruins began at moonrise, when the silver light made the broken stones gleam like scattered bones. Arathan moved as silently as shadow, his staff wrapped in black cloth to muffle its natural radiance, his grey robes pulled close about him like a cloak of night. Shadowmane he had left tethered in a grove of ash trees, a mile distant, with whispered words that would bring the horse to him if need be. The outer walls of Valdris had been thrown down in the city's final hour, but their foundations still lay buried beneath the earth, a maze of stone and root that had to be navigated with utmost care. One wrong step might send an avalanche of rubble cascading into the darkness, alerting the watchers to his presence. As he picked his way through the debris, the wizard felt the weight of years pressing down upon him. 500 summers had come and gone since last he walked these streets, when Valdris still gleamed white and gold beneath the morning sun. He had been young then, young as his kind counted years, and the world had seemed bright with possibility. King Eldarin had ruled from the crystal throne. The rivers ran clear and swift, and children played in gardens where now only brambles grew. All gone now, all consumed by fire and sword and the terrible hunger of the darkness. A sound ahead made him freeze, the scrape of stone upon stone, as if something heavy had shifted among the ruins. Arathan crouched low behind a fallen pillar and peered into the shadows. There, not 30 paces away, a figure moved through the debris with the fluid grace of a hunting cat. It was cloaked in darkness that seemed to drink in the moonlight, and where its feet touched the ground, the very stones seemed to wither and crack. He, Wraithwalker, one of the 9 who had served the enemy in the days of his first rising. the wizard's blood chilled in his veins. If such servants moved freely here, then the corruption ran deeper than he had feared. The creature passed by without sensing his presence, its terrible gaze fixed upon some distant goal. But its passage left behind a trail of withering cold that made the air itself seem brittle, and in its wake came others, lesser shadows that flickered and darted between the ruins like bats at twilight. When they had gone, Arathan rose and continued his careful descent. The path he followed was one known to few, a secret way that led to the heart of the old palace through the underground aqueducts that had once brought fresh water from the mountain springs. The entrance lay hidden beneath a stand of thorn bushes, marked only by a carved stone that bore the sign of the star and crown. The passage beyond was black as pitch, carved from living rock and lined with tiles that had once blazed with captured sunlight. Now they were cold and dark, but they still held their shape, and the way was clear. As Arathan made his way through the narrow tunnel, his staff began to gleam despite its wrappings, responding to the presence of great evil somewhere ahead. The tunnel ended in a chamber that had once been a repository of precious things, gems and gold and artifacts of power gathered from all the corners of the world. Now it was empty, save for dust and the echo of his footsteps. But through a crack in the far wall, he could see the red glow that spoke of his goal. Section 6. The Captive King. Beyond the crack in the ancient wall lay a chamber that defied the ruin above. Here, in the deepest vaults of the palace, the stones still held their courses true, and the ceiling soared upward into darkness that seemed to have weight and substance. But it was not empty darkness. Chains of black iron hung from the heights, and in those chains, suspended above a pit that breathed forth vapors of despair, hung a figure that had once been a man. Arathan knew him at once, though 5 centuries had passed since last they spoke. Eldaron the Golden, last king of Valdris, who had stood upon the walls in the city's final hour and defied the darkness even as it swept over him like a tide. His crown was gone, his royal raiment reduced to tatters, but still he bore himself with the dignity of one born to rule. So came a voice like wind through autumn leaves, weak but unbroken. The stormcrow returns to the nest of ashes. I wondered when you would come. The wizard stepped into the chamber, his staff now blazing with silver light that drove the shadows to the corners. My Lord King, I had thought, we all thought, that I was dead. Eldaron's laugh held no mirth, only the bitter wisdom of long captivity. Death would have been a kindness. But he who commands here has use for the knowledge that dwells in royal minds, the secret ways, the hidden vaults, the names of all who might resist his rising power. Arathan moved closer, studying the chains that bound the king. They were wrought of more than mortal iron. Runes of binding ran along their length, glowing with a sickly light that spoke of torment beyond flesh. How long have you hung here, my lord? Time has no meaning in this place. Days, years, centuries, all flow together like water down a drain. But I have counted each dawn by the changing of the light through yon crack in the wall. Eldaron lifted his gaze toward a narrow fissure high above. By that reckoning, it has been long indeed since Valdris burned. The Palantír, Arathan said urgently. Does he have it? Does he use it? The king's eyes, still bright with unquenchable fire, fixed upon the wizard's face. Ah, you feel it too, the pulse, the calling. Yes, he has found it at last, though it fought him long and hard. It lies in the chamber above, set upon a throne of black stone, and through its crystal depths he looks upon all the lands of the west, seeking weakness, plotting ruin. But not yet mastered, Arathan observed. If it were truly his, this place would ring with his laughter, and his armies would already be marching. Indeed, the stone was made by hands that served the light, and it remembers its true purpose. It shows him much, but not all, and what it shows, it twists with its own will to confound his plans. Eldarin's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But his servants work upon it, day and night, with hammer and spell, seeking to break its resistance. And I fear they are close to success. The chamber shook suddenly, and from above came the sound of many voices raised in harsh chanting. The red glow that seeped through cracks in the ceiling grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with words that made the very stones writhe with pain. Section 7. The Necromancer's Voice. The spiral stair that led upward from the king's prison was carved from the living rock of the hill, each step worn smooth by the passage of ages. As Arathan climbed through the darkness, the sound of chanting grew louder, and with it came a presence that pressed against his mind like a weight of iron, ancient, malevolent, patient as stone, and cruel as winter frost. At the stair's summit lay a door of tarnished silver, graven with signs that had once been wards against evil, but now served only to contain the darkness within. Through its keyhole seeped the red light of the Palantír, pulsing in time with the chanted words that echoed from the chamber beyond. Arathan pressed his ear to the cold metal and listened. 9 voices spoke in unison, their words in the black speech that had been forged in the fires of the ancient darkness. But beneath their chanting, he heard another voice, deeper, more resonant, speaking without words directly to the mind and heart. So, Grey Wanderer, you have come at last to witness the hour of my triumph. 5 centuries have I labored in shadow, gathering my strength, calling my servants from the dark places of the world. And now, the great prize lies within my grasp. The voice was silk over steel, honey laced with poison. It did not come through his ears, but arose from within, as if the very air had learned to speak. Arathan felt his grip tighten upon his staff, and the crystal pendant at his throat grew warm with responsive light. I know you, servant of the void, he whispered to the darkness. You are not the first of your kind I have faced, nor will you be the last. Ah, but I am different from my lesser brethren. I am Malthorn the Deathless, first among the 9, herald of my master's coming. Through me his will is done, and by my hand shall his dominion be established over all the lands beneath the sky. The door shivered under Arathan's touch, and through the keyhole he glimpsed the chamber within. It was vast and circular, its walls lined with pillars of black marble that soared upward into shadows. At its center stood a throne carved from a single block of obsidian, and upon that throne sat a figure wrapped in robes of midnight, tall, terrible, crowned with iron and malice. But it was not the necromancer that drew the wizard's gaze. It was the sphere of crystal that hovered above the throne, blazing with inner fire that painted the chamber walls in shifting patterns of red and gold. The Palantír Valdenor, greatest of all the seeing stones, hung suspended in a web of silver chains, while the 9 worked their dark enchantments upon its crystalline surface. Behold the culmination of my labors, the voice whispered with satisfaction. Soon the stone's resistance will be broken, and through its eyes I shall gaze upon every secret of the western lands. Your white city shall have no hiding place from my sight. Your counsels shall be known to me ere they are spoken, and your plans shall be as open books before my gaze. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the Palantír blazed like a star. For one terrible moment, Arathan felt its questing intelligence brush against his mind, not hostile, but desperate, crying out for aid with a voice that had no words. In that moment of contact, he understood. The stone was not being mastered. It was being tortured, its noble spirit bent and twisted by magics that sought to remake it in Shadow's image. And if those magics succeeded, the free peoples of the world would face an enemy who could see their every move before it was made. Section 8. Fire in the Darkness. The silver door yielded to the wizard's touch like mist before the morning sun. He stepped into the chamber with staff held high, its crystal head blazing with pure white light that drove the shadows back against the walls like living things in flight. The chanting of the nine faltered and died as they turned to face this unexpected intruder, their eyeless faces twisted with rage and surprise. But it was Malthorn who spoke, his voice now carrying the full weight of his malice. "Foolish old man, you walk into the very heart of my power, thinking your small light can stand against the darkness I have gathered here. You are 5 centuries too late." Arathan advanced to the center of the chamber, his gaze fixed upon the tortured Palantír that writhed in its bonds of silver chain. Up close, he could see the spider web of cracks that the necromancer's ministrations had wrought across its surface, and the way its inner fire flickered like a flame guttering in a strong wind. "I am exactly where I need to be," the wizard replied, his voice echoing from the vaulted ceiling. "And exactly when I need to be here." He raised his staff, and the crystal at its head blazed forth with the pure light of creation itself, not the harsh radiance of fire or lightning, but the gentle luminance of the first dawn, when darkness was driven back to its appointed place and all the world was young and fair. The light struck the Palantír, and for one shining moment, the ancient crystal blazed in response, its surface clearing as it remembered its true nature. Malthorn shrieked in fury, rising from his obsidian throne with hands wreathed in shadow flame. "Destroy him," he commanded, and the 9 moved to obey. But their forms wavered and flickered in the wizard's light as if they were things of smoke given temporary substance. "You mistake me for some hedge wizard with parlor tricks," Arathan said, taking another step forward. "I am one of the Astari, sent from the uttermost west to stand guard against the darkness. And I name you Malthorn the Deathless. I see you for what you truly are." The necromancer's form began to shift and change, the illusion of mortality falling away like a discarded cloak. What stood revealed was a thing of shadow and malice, tall as 2 men, crowned with iron spikes and wrapped in robes that were woven from the stuff of nightmares. But worst of all were its eyes, empty sockets that burned with cold fire and held depths of cruelty that had no bottom. "And what am I, old fool?" "You are fear given form," Arathan replied, advancing steadily toward the throne. "You are doubt made flesh, despair clothed in power. You are everything that whispers in the darkness that hope is vain and courage is folly. But you are not invincible." His staff struck the floor with a sound like thunder, and from its crystal head burst forth a column of silver flame that reached from floor to ceiling. The 9 wailed and fled, their forms dissolving like smoke in a high wind. But Malthorn stood his ground, wrapping himself in shadows that hissed and steamed where the light touched them. "The Palantír is mine," he snarled. "I have bound it with chains of sorrow and sealed it with the tears of captive kings." "No," said Arathan, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "It remembers its true master." Section 9. Return to the Wise. The halls of Silverbrook had never seemed so fair as they did to Arathan's eyes upon his return from the glass hills. The morning sun streamed through windows of coloured crystal, casting rainbows upon walls of white stone that had been carved by craftsmen of the elder days. Here was peace. Here was beauty. Here was the accumulated wisdom of ages preserved against the coming storm. But even here, in the heart of the sanctuary, shadows lingered. The Palantír of Valdenor sat upon a table of silver wood, wrapped in cloths of white silk that could not quite contain its restless light. Though freed from the necromancer's bonds, the great seeing stone bore scars that might never heal, cracks in its crystal surface that spoke of torments endured and powers forced upon it against its nature. "You were fortunate," said Lady Morwen, her fingers tracing the air above the stone without quite touching its surface. "Another day, perhaps even another hour, and Malthorn's corruption would have been complete. Then not all the power of the Astari could have cleansed it." Arathan nodded wearily from his chair beside the great hearth. 3 days had passed since his return from the ruins of Valdris, but his limbs still ached from the battle with the necromancer, and his mind bore the weight of all he had seen in that place of shadow. The question now is what we do with it. The stone is free, but it is also wounded, and there are others of the 9 still abroad in the world, seeking their master's will. "Malthorn spoke truly in one thing," said Thane Boromir of the Northern Marches, who had ridden hard from his fortress at Ironhold when news of the wizard's mission reached him. His weathered face was grim as he studied the wrapped Palantír. "If the enemy can bring such power to bear upon one seeing stone, what might he attempt against the others? There are still 3 of the 7 that remain in the west. 1 here, 1 in the Tower of the Moon, and 1—" He paused, his voice growing heavy. "1 in the White City itself, in the throne room of the kings." Lady Morwen's face grew pale. If Malthorn had succeeded in his work, if he had truly mastered the Valdris stone, then through it he might have reached out to its sisters. The network that once bound them in harmony could have become a web of corruption, spreading his influence into the very heart of the free lands. "But he did not succeed," Arathan said firmly, "and now we have warning of his purpose. The other stones can be warded, their keepers warned. The White Council must be convened. All the guardians of the West must know what manner of enemy walks among us." "And what of King Eldaron?" asked the Thane. "You say he yet lives, chained in that place of shadow." The wizard's jaw tightened. "I had not the power to break his bonds. They were wrought with enchantments beyond my skill to unravel. But I gave him hope, and hope is a weapon the enemy fears above all others. The king endures, and while he endures, the royal line of Valdris is not extinct." Section 10. Stirring the North. The road to the Iron Hills wound through valleys where the autumn mist hung like veils of silver, and the peaks rose sharp and proud against a sky the colour of steel. Here, in the fastnesses of the north, dwelt the children of Durain the Stone Father, the dwarves whose axes had carved kingdoms from the living rock and whose hammers had rung with songs of making since the world's first dawn. Arathan rode swiftly, for time was short and the need was great. Behind him in Silverbrook, Lady Morwen worked to reach out to the scattered guardians of the West, sending forth ravens and swift riders with word of the enemy's rising. But the dwarves kept their own counsel and trusted few beyond the gates of their mountain halls. If they were to stand with the free peoples in the darkness ahead, the invitation must come from one they knew and respected. The great gates of Ironhold stood open to the morning light, wrought of steel and adamant and carved with runes of warding that had been old when the world was young. Beyond them lay a vast hall pillared with columns of natural stone, where the sound of hammer upon anvil echoed like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Arathan Stormwalker, the voice that hailed him, was deep as thunder and rich as aged wine. From the shadows of the great hall strode Dane Ironbeard, Lord of the Iron Hills, his magnificent beard woven with threads of silver and his arms bare to show the intricate tattoos that marked his lineage. Well met, old friend. It has been long since your shadow darkened our doors. Too long, Dan, son of Nine, the wizard replied, dismounting from Shadowmane and clasping the Dwarf Lord's outstretched hand. But dark times call for the renewal of old friendships. The hall that Dane led him to was carved from a single vast geode, its walls lined with crystals that caught and reflected the light of forge fires burning in braziers of black iron. Here the lords of the 7 clans had gathered at their king's summons, stern-faced warriors whose beards were white with age and whose eyes held the deep wisdom of those who delve in the secret places of the earth. "Speak, wizard," Dane commanded from his throne of carved granite. "What news from the lowlands that brings you to us in such haste?" Arathan stood before them and spoke of all that had passed. The stirring of shadows in the Elderwood, the corruption discovered in the ruins of Voldris, the battle with Multhorn, and the recovery of the ancient Seeing Stone. As he spoke, the Dwarf Lords leaned forward in their seats, their faces growing grave as the full scope of the enemy's plans became clear. "So the old evil stirs again," growled Balin Stonebeard, eldest of the clan chiefs. "My grandfather's grandfather fought in the war of the last alliance. He spoke of shadow creatures that feared neither sword nor flame, and of a malice that sought to devour all the light in the world." "The patterns repeat themselves," Arathan agreed. "But each time the enemy returns, he is subtler, more cunning. He does not come with armies of orcs and wolves as before. This time, he works in shadow and secrecy, corrupting from within rather than conquering from without." Dane's fingers drummed upon the arm of his throne, a sound like distant thunder in the crystal-walled hall. "What would you have of us, Stormwalker?" Section 11. A Hobbit Remembered. The peaceful valley lay like a green jewel set in the rolling downs, its meadows bright with wildflowers and its streams singing with the voices of water sprites. Here, far from the great roads and the march of armies, the halflings made their homes in burrows carved into the hillsides, their round doors painted in cheerful colours and their gardens tended with loving care. It was a place that seemed touched by older magics, not the high sorceries of the Astari or the deep powers of the dwarves, but something simpler and perhaps more enduring. Here the seasons followed their ancient rhythm, and the greatest concerns were the proper time for planting turnips, and whether the dragon's arms would have enough ale for the harvest festival. Arathan found Bilbo Bramblebrook tending his garden on the side of Bagshot Hill, his curly brown hair gleaming in the afternoon sun as he carefully weeded around his prized tomatoes. The hobbit looked up at the sound of approaching footsteps, his round face breaking into a smile of genuine welcome. Arathan Greycloak, what brings you to our little corner of the world? Not trouble, I hope. We've had quite enough excitement for one season, what with young Peregrine getting himself stuck down the Bramblewood well and having to be hauled out by his ears. The wizard smiled, despite the weight of his concerns. Here, at least, innocence still dwelt untroubled by the shadows that gathered in the east. No trouble, old friend. At least, not yet. I come seeking wisdom of a different sort. Bilbo set down his weeding fork and wiped his hands on his green waistcoat. Wisdom from a simple hobbit who's never been further than Millhaven Market. You flatter me, wizard, but come, sit a while. I'll put the kettle on, and we can talk properly. The parlour of Bag End was a marvel of comfortable clutter, overstuffed chairs covered in floral chintz, walls lined with books and maps, and every surface decorated with small treasures that spoke of a life well lived. Bilbo bustled about preparing tea with the easy efficiency of one who took genuine pleasure in hospitality. Now then, the hobbit said, settling into his favourite chair with a steaming cup cradled in his small hands. What sort of wisdom could you possibly need from me? Arathan gazed out through the round window at the peaceful valley beyond. Tell me, Bilbo, what makes a hobbit brave? The question seemed to surprise his host, who nearly choked on his tea. Brave? Me? Oh no, I think you have me confused with someone else entirely. I'm as timid as they come, won't even venture into the thornwood after dark for fear of catching cold. And yet, the wizard said gently, when the ruffians came last spring to trouble the Millhaven folk, who was it that stood up to their leader in the town square? Who reminded him that Peaceful Valley was under the protection of the White Council? Bilbo flushed and waved a dismissive hand. Anyone would have done the same. They were picking on poor old Sandyman, taking his grain without payment. It wasn't right. Precisely. Arathan leaned forward, his grey eyes intent. You saw something that wasn't right, and you acted to stop it. Not because you were unafraid. I could see your hands shaking from across the square, but because someone had to stand up. Well, Bilbo said uncomfortably, what else was there to do? Section 12. The plan set in motion. The great library of Silverbrook held treasures beyond counting. Scrolls and codices gathered from all the corners of the world, maps drawn by explorers long dead, chronicles of kingdoms that had risen and fallen like waves upon the shore. But it was not among these ancient documents that Arathan found what he sought. Instead, he stood before a table where newer writings lay spread, letters sealed with the marks of kings and lords, reports from rangers who watched the wild lands, and at the center of it all, a map marked with pins of different colors that showed the gathering storm. Lady Morwen entered as the evening bells were ringing, her robes rustling softly against the marble floor. In her hands, she carried a leather satchel, and her face bore the satisfaction of one who had seen complex plans fall into place. It is done, she said simply, setting the satchel upon the table. The messages have gone out to all the guardians of the West. King Elisar of the White City will convene a great council within the month. The Lord of Rivendell has promised aid, and even the Sea Wardens have agreed to send representatives. Arathan nodded, his fingers tracing the routes marked upon the map. And our more immediate concerns? From the satchel, Morwen drew forth a scroll, sealed with red wax and bearing the mark of a mountain and crown. Thine Boromir has agreed to the plan. His rangers will begin moving quietly into position along the eastern borders. If Malthorn attempts to strike again before the council can meet, they will be ready. Good. And the other matter? The lady's expression grew thoughtful. Dain Ironbeard has sent word from the Iron Hills. The dwarves are intrigued by your proposal. They speak of old legends, ancient prophecies that tell of a time when the mountains themselves will march to war. But they want assurances, proof that what you plan can truly succeed. Arathan moved to the great window that looked eastward toward the glass hills, now peaceful in the gathering dusk. They shall have their proof soon enough, but first, we must set the stage properly. Has the halfling agreed? Bilbo Bramblebrook? Morwen's eyebrows rose in surprise. Surely you cannot be serious. He is brave enough in his own small way. But what we plan requires more than courage. It requires someone who can move unseen through the most perilous places in the world. The wizard turned from the window, a slight smile playing about his lips. And who better than one whom no enemy would think to watch for? The enemy expects heroes, Morwen, tall warriors with bright swords and noble banners. He does not expect a small hobbit with furry feet and a love of good food. But the dangers are real, yes, but so is the need. Arathan moved to the map and placed his finger upon a point deep in the eastern waste, where the mark of a red dragon coiled around a mountain peak. The fire drake of Smokehold has slumbered for 3 centuries, but my sources tell me that it stirs. If Malthorn could wake it, could bind it to his will. Morwen's face went pale. The devastation would be beyond imagining. Section 13. The Fire Awakens. In the eastern waste, where the bones of the world lay bare beneath a sky the color of old brass, the lonely mountain stood like a broken fang against the horizon. For 3 centuries it had slumbered, its halls empty of all save the echo of ancient dreams, its forges cold and its treasures gathering dust in the darkness below. But now, something stirred in the deepest vaults, where gold lay piled in drifts higher than a man could reach, and gems sparkled like captured stars in the eternal night. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the hollow mountain, the beating of wings vast enough to darken the sky, the scraping of claws that could rend stone like parchment. Smaug the Golden, last of the great fire drakes, raised his mighty head and opened eyes like molten furnaces. The dreams that had held him in slumber for so long were troubled now, filled with whispers that spoke in the black speech and promised him dominion over all the lands beneath the sun. The dragon stretched, his coils shifting and rustling through the treasure hoard with a sound like a landslide of gold coins. He was beautiful and terrible to behold, scales that gleamed like burnished copper, teeth like crystal spears, and along his length ran veins of fire that pulsed with his heartbeat. When he breathed, the air shimmered with heat, and when he moved, the mountain itself trembled at his passage. "Rise, O mighty one," whispered the voice in his dreams, honeyed and persuasive. "Too long have you slumbered, while lesser beings walk the earth above. The time has come to reclaim your birthright. to make all the world your hoard. Smaug's laughter was like the sound of 1,000 forges roaring to life at once. Who dares to wake the king under the mountain? Who speaks to me of birthrights as if I were some petty princeling in need of counsel? I am one who offers you alliance, great Smaug. I am one who would see your glory restored and your enemies laid low. Through fire and fear, through gold and greed, together we could rule all the lands from the Grey Havens to the Sea of Rune. The dragon's head swayed from side to side, his terrible gaze searching the shadows of his hall. He could feel the presence behind the voice, ancient, malevolent, patient as stone and subtle as poison. I know you, Shadow Speaker. You are one of the 9 who served the Black Master in the days of his power, but your lord is gone, cast down and scattered to the winds. Why should Smaug the Mighty heed the words of a masterless wraith? Because the master is not gone, only sleeping. Even now he stirs in the far darkness, gathering his strength for the final war that will remake all the world in his image. And when that day comes, those who stood with him will be rewarded beyond their wildest dreams. Smaug considered this, his tail lashing among the treasures with a sound like breaking bells. The promise of more gold, more gems, more beauty to add to his hoard was tempting indeed. And there was something else, a hunger that had grown in him through the long years of solitude, a desire for dominion that mere wealth could not satisfy. What would you have of me, Wraith? The answer came wrapped in images that burned themselves into the dragon's mind. Cities in flames, armies fleeing before his shadow, the great and mighty of the world kneeling in terror before his throne. Section 14. A blade not yet drawn. In the depths of winter, when the world lay locked in frost and the very air seemed brittle with cold, a shadow fell across the peaceful realm of Rohan. It came not with the thunder of hoofbeats or the clash of steel, but silently, like mist creeping across the moors in the hour before dawn. King Theoden sat in the golden hall of his fathers, his weathered hands resting upon the arms of his throne, his grey hair gleaming in the light of the great hearth. Around him stood his most trusted counselors, Eomer, his nephew, who captained the Riders of the Mark, Hama, keeper of the king's guards, and at his right hand, Grimmer called Wormtongue, whose counsel had grown ever more frequent in recent months. The reports from the eastern borders grow troubling, my lord, Eomer said, his young face grave with concern. The farmers speak of lights moving in the sky at night, and sounds like the crying of great beasts carried on the wind. 3 separate villages report livestock found drained of blood, with marks upon their necks that no wolf or bear could make. The king's brow furrowed, and his grip tightened upon his throne. Send patrols to investigate. Double the watch on all the border settlements. My lord, Grimmer's voice was smooth as oil upon water. Surely young Eomer sees shadows where there are only clouds. These are the fears of simple folk, made large by winter's gloom. Would you have the riders of Rohan chasing after phantom enemies, while real threats may gather elsewhere? Theoden looked to his counselor, and for a moment his eyes seemed clouded, as if he gazed through veils of weariness and age. Perhaps you speak wisdom, Grimmer. The winter has been hard, and men's minds turn easily to dark imaginings when the sun grows weak. Eomer's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue. There had been too many such moments of late, times when the king seemed to hear only Grimmer's counsel, while the voices of others faded like echoes in an empty hall. But in the stables of Idorus, where the great war horses of the mark stamped and snorted in their stalls, other conversations were taking place. Erkenbrand of Westfold had ridden in under cover of darkness, his cloak white with frost and his face grim with tidings that could not wait for the formality of court. The Dunlendings mass in the hills, he told Eomer in urgent whispers. More than we have seen in a generation, but they do not move like men preparing for a cattle raid or a settling of old scores. There is purpose in their movements, strategy in their positioning. Someone guides them, someone with knowledge of our defences. The king must be told, Eomer said. Erkenbrand shook his grey head. I tried to gain audience 3 times today. Each time, Wormtongue was there before me, filling the king's ears with reasons why my words were not to be trusted. He speaks of plots within plots, suggests that I seek to make myself important with false alarms. The young marshal's hand moved instinctively to the sword at his side. Guthvini inherited from his father, its blade bright with the runes of victory. But steel alone would not cut through the web of whispers and half-truths that seemed to surround his uncle like a net of shadow. Section 15. The kingdom reclaimed the armies of the free peoples gathered in the valley of Azanul-Bizar as the spring winds began to blow, melting the last snows from the peaks of the misty mountains. It was there, in that place of ancient memory where the dwarves had once fought their greatest battle, that the final reckoning would come. Arathan stood upon a ridge overlooking the mustering forces, his grey robes stirring in the mountain breeze. Below him, the banners of a dozen realms snapped in the wind. The white tree of Gondor, the golden horse of Rohan, the silver stars of the elven lords, and the iron fist of the dwarven clans. 10,000 warriors had answered the call, leaving their homes and hearths to stand against the darkness that gathered in the east. But it was not the sight of the armies that held the wizard's attention. It was the figure that approached along the ridge, small, travel-worn, but carrying himself with a dignity that had not been there when they first met. Bilbo Bramblebrook had returned from his journey to the lonely mountain, and the hobbit bore in his hands a prize beyond all reckoning. "Well," said Bilbo with characteristic understatement, "that was rather more exciting than I had anticipated." In his small hands, he held a gem that caught the morning light and threw it back in rainbows. The Arkenstone, heart of the mountain, greatest treasure of the ancient dwarf kings. But more than that, he carried news that would change the course of the war. "Smaug is dead," the hobbit said simply. "I'm afraid I was rather clever about it, actually." Found a weak spot in his armor, right over the heart. A single arrow, well placed, and down he came like a falling star. Made quite a dreadful noise, I must say. Arathan felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had carried for months. Without the dragon's fire to aid them, Malthorn's forces would be far less formidable. And the mountain? "Reclaimed," Bilbo said with a smile. Dane Ironbeard and his warriors arrived just as the dragon fell. The halls of Erebor ring once more with the sound of dwarf song and hammer blow. Though I must say, they're rather put out about the mess Smaug made of their tapestries. From the valley below came the sound of horns, the deep resonant notes of dwarf war horns answered by the clear call of elven trumpets and the martial thunder of human drums. The armies were moving, beginning the long march that would take them to the Glass Hills and the final confrontation with the forces of shadow. But Arathan's thoughts were not entirely on the coming battle. In his mind, he could see other movements, the subtle repositioning of power that Bilbo's success had made possible. With Smaug gone and Erebor restored to the Free Peoples, the eastern approaches were secured. The network of alliances that had taken months to forge was complete at last. "There will be songs sung of your deed, Master Bramblebrook," the wizard said. "Bilbo the Dragon Slayer they will call you, and children yet unborn will hear tales of your courage." The hobbit looked rather embarrassed by this prospect. "Oh, I do hope they won't make too much of a fuss about it. All I want is to get back to my garden and see if the cabbages have come up properly." Section 16. A ring still sleeps in the depths of the Gladden Fields, where the great river wound its way through marshes thick with reed and mist. Something stirred that had lain hidden for long ages of the world. Beneath the dark waters, in the mud and silt of centuries, a small band of gold caught a stray beam of sunlight and gleamed with inner fire. The One Ring, greatest and most terrible of all the rings of power, had slept here since the day King Isildur fell to the arrows of the enemy's servants. Through all the long years of its concealment, it had dreamed, dreams of fire and dominion, of the great eye that had forged it in the fires of Mount Doom, of the hand that had worn it when the world trembled at its master's will. But now those dreams grew more vivid, more urgent. The ring could feel the stirring of its master's servants, could sense the gathering storm that would soon sweep across all the lands of the West. It knew, with the terrible awareness that was its gift and curse, that the hour of its finding drew near. Far to the south, in the halls of Silverbrook, where the great council was meeting, Arathan felt a chill touch his mind, like the brush of a raven's wing. He paused in his speech, his words faltering as something dark and potent pressed against the edges of his awareness. "What is it?" asked Lady Morwen, seeing the sudden pallor in the wizard's face. I am not certain." Arathan moved to the great window that looked out over the gardens, his staff clicking on the marble floor. "There is something, a presence, awakening, something that has slept long, but now stirs with purpose." King Elisar leaned forward in his chair, his noble face creased with concern. "Another enemy, another servant of the shadow." "No," the wizard said slowly. "Not a servant. Something greater and more terrible than any wraith or sorcerer. Something that—" He stopped, his eyes widening as understanding came. "The ring, the master ring of which the old tales speak. It wakes." A silence fell over the council chamber like a shroud. All who sat there knew the legends. How the Dark Lord had poured his malice and his will into a band of gold. How it had been lost when his first kingdom fell. How it waited still in some hidden place for the hand that would claim it and restore its master to power. "If this is true," said Elrond, half-elven, his ageless face grave with wisdom, "then all our victories may count for naught. Against the united power of the ring and its master, no army of the Free Peoples could stand." But Arathan shook his head, though his face remained troubled. "The ring stirs, yes, but it does not wake to its master's call. It wakes to something else, some other purpose that I cannot fathom." He turned from the window, his grey eyes distant with thought. "There is hope yet, though it be slender as a spider's thread." Section 17. Hope in Ashes. The battle for the Glass Hills was won, but victory came at a price that would be remembered for generations. Where once the ruins of Valdris had lain shrouded in shadow and malice, now they blazed with cleansing fire as the last of Malthorn's servants were driven from their hidden places. The necromancer himself had fled when the armies of the free peoples surrounded his stronghold, dissolving like smoke before the dawn, rather than face the combined might of those who stood against him. Arathan walked through the smouldering ruins as the sun set on the field of battle, his staff dim now, and his robes singed with flame and darkened with ash. Around him, the work of cleansing went on, rangers and dwarves and elven warriors moving through the shattered halls, ensuring that no trace of shadow remained to corrupt the sacred ground. At the heart of the ancient palace, where the necromancer's throne had stood, they found King Eldaron at last. The royal chains had shattered when their master fled, and the king of Valdris stood free beneath the open sky for the first time in 5 centuries. He was changed, marked by his long captivity in ways that would never fully heal, but the fire of kingship still burned bright in his eyes. "My city," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he gazed upon the ruins around him. "My people, all gone to ash and memory." "Not all," said Lady Morwen, approaching with careful steps. In her hands, she carried something wrapped in white silk, the Palantír Valdenor, cleansed now of its corruption and gleaming with the pure light of stars. The Seeing Stone remembers, and while it remembers, the glory of Valdris can never truly die. The king took the crystal orb with trembling hands, and as he did so, its light grew brighter. For a moment, just a moment, the ruins around them seemed to shimmer and change, and those who watched could see, ghostly and beautiful, the towers of white stone that had once reached toward heaven, the gardens where fountains sang, the halls where nobles had danced beneath crystal chandeliers. Then the vision faded, and they stood once more among broken stones and scattered ash. But the memory lingered, and with it the promise that beauty could be restored, that what was broken could be made whole again. "The enemy is not defeated," Arathan said as the last light faded from the western sky. "Malthorn has fled, but he will return. And there are others, servants of shadow who move even now in distant lands, preparing for the final war that is to come. This victory gives us time, nothing more." "Then we must use that time well," replied King Elisar, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "The alliances forged here must be maintained. The watch must be kept. And when the darkness comes again, as come it will, we must be ready." In the distance, a single star kindled in the darkening sky, bright and clear and beautiful. It was followed by another and another, until the whole dome of heaven blazed with light. And watching those stars, the guardians of the free lands took what comfort they could in the knowledge that light endured, that hope survived, and that even in the darkest hour, there were those who would stand against the shadow and never yield. The age of peace was ending. The age of trial was about to begin. But tonight, for this one night, the light held dominion, and that was enough. Thus ends the chronicle of the lost Seeing Stone, as set down by the scribes of Silverbrook in the closing days of the third age of stars. May all who read these words remember that in the darkest hour, when hope seems lost and courage fails, it is often the smallest among us who prove the strongest and the humblest hearts that burn brightest against the night, the end.